We're going to get a USC perspective on today's Locked On Badgers. We got Shotgun Spratling joining the show, and we're going to talk about how can USC elevate the Big Ten and how can the Big Ten elevate USC. And we are also not going to bring up Tackett Curtis. Not once. All that and more on today's Locked On Badgers.
You are Locked On Badgers, your daily podcast on the Wisconsin Badgers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Thank you for making Locked On Badgers one of your first listens every day. Really, truly appreciate it as we continue to build this community. I also want to just be a big shout out to Shotgun Spratling from Peristyle USC podcast. Also covers a lot of Division I baseball, which will not be applicable in this show for obvious reasons. But Rick, thank you for jumping on the show, man. And as I mentioned in the beginning, we will not be getting into Tackett Curtis at all.
Oh, come on. This is USC finally gets a win in recruiting. You don't even want to talk about it. And what a great name. Let's just say that. We'll leave it at that. What a great 100%. Name, Tackett. Is actually his middle name. His grandfather was in World War I, and he took on his grandfather's name. I wanted to go by that rather than his first name. So that we'll leave it at that. If you haven't seen the highlights, though, if you're a Badgers fan, then go watch the highlights just so you can have that one tear just stream down your face.
I don't think any Badgers fan can go watch the highlights now. That ripped our hearts out. We were all in on Tackett Curtis. We talked about him on the show a billion times. We had his coach on the show, but we are not going down that road. We've already had our therapy session there. Huge win, though, for y'all, and on defense especially. Just as a big time player out of Manny High School. But let's talk here. I want to talk about start here. USC joins the Big Ten. UCLA is coming. What was that? This was an incredibly well kept secret. It kind of broke as it was happening. What was your initial reaction? Were you surprised? Were you excited? What is the news like for you?
Absolutely shocked. We actually had seen there had been some message board rumors on the 24/7 Sports message boards from another Big Ten site a couple of months before, and it kind of got brought up on we do live shows, so people will ask questions in the chat and stuff, and it got brought up, and I shot it down. It's like, look, this is a bargaining ploy. USC's not going to the Big Ten. It's just to try to get, as they go into these negotiations for the Pac-12, just to get some more leverage there, because obviously they're the big name brand in football, and just get as much leverage as you can going into this negotiations, because the Pac-12 has been equal revenue share for everyone, and probably shouldn't be that way. So I basically completely shot it down, so I looked absolutely incredible when this came up again. But no, it was just a complete shock to me. I did not think that was going to be happening, but I think it tells you a lot about the direction of college athletics right now, where it is all about the money and is becoming much more of a national event in a national, picture landscape rather than the regional coverage and regional rivalries and all that stuff. That stuff has kind of been pushed aside a little bit, and you're getting whatever goes to the TV contracts and that that national brand and the national TV contracts rather than your JP Sports or whatever it was that I grew up watching in the South. Where you only get that regional coverage, and you're seeing Wake Forest play Georgia Tech or something where you would never be watching that game otherwise. But now you're seeing the big TV contracts and ESPN trying to stream so many games and everything to get everyone on ESPN Plus and all these different, potential streaming revenues that are coming into it. And it's, you're seeing the athletics be spread farther and farther apart. And, this is the biggest move so far on the national landscape of connecting basically coast to coast, one conference, right. And one of the Power 5 conferences. Now the WAC had done this a little bit previously. Now, the WAC, a couple years ago, the WAC has gone through multiple changes, but the Western Athletic Conference did have four corners. The four corners of their conference previously were Seattle University in Seattle, obviously, Cal State Bakersfield in Southern California, and then UT Rio Grande Valley, which is East Texas, basically on the Mexican border, and then you had Chicago State. So that was 3/4 of the time zones and everything, and the travel. I've talked with a lot of those coaches and stuff, the baseball coaches and whatnot. The travel was atrocious for them.
Right.
And that is not a Power 5 conference. So that is one of the things that coming into this and hearing this news, the first thing I think of is, that travel is going to be rough for some sports.
Now, and that's something the Big Ten did talk about, that they would find a way to make this easier to some degree. And obviously, UCLA is coming along as well, so there's going to be a game every year that's going to be local. And travel, I kind of wonder if you're going to, let's say, Colorado, right? And you're boarding a plane anyway. Going to maybe the Nebraskas and the Purdues and the Minnesotas might not be that different. I mean, it's more travel for sure, but it's not maybe a huge difference on a plane. But then when you're talking going to Rutgers, Maryland, Penn State, it really does add a lot onto that. Now, I want to ask from a USC perspective, how does USC enhance the Big Ten, and how does the Big Ten more so? How does the Big Ten enhance USC? Like, how does this help USC, primarily football and basketball, take that next step?
I mean, the first thing it does is money. It just is a huge windfall of money. The potential, and hey, again, the contracts have not been signed. They're in the negotiation windows and whatnot. But the potential of USC and UCLA, the Pac-12 being around 30 to 35 were kind of the estimates. The $1 million per year that they would receive. To some estimates that the teams in the Big Ten will now receive $100 million a year. I mean, it's not like, hey, it's 10 or 15 million. That's what it was 5 years ago. And it's like, oh, USC's falling behind Purdue. That sounds strange. USC's falling behind Rutgers in the revenue that's being generated and the revenue they're receiving. It is 3 times as much potentially.
Right.
So that is absolutely crucial. And hey, the extra money, and this is part of the reason why USC and UCLA can make this, is that extra money will help with different travel. You'll be able to travel, charter more planes. You'll be able to do some different things to help out there. You'll be able to stay maybe longer because, you have a baseball team that's 30 players and you add the support staff, the coaching staff, all that stuff. That's a lot of people to be putting up in a hotel. But you could potentially do that for a week, and you stay for a full week, and you play one series the weekend before, one series the weekend after. A lot of teams do that in baseball for spring break and whatnot. But you have a couple more options with different sports. Now, football, that's not going to be affected. You're not going to stay a full week like that. But you have the option if you want to in football or other sports. If you have that back-to-back, if somehow you get, Minnesota one week and then you got Rutgers the next, and both those are road games for one of the LA schools. Now you have that option that you can put up 100 players is expensive for a full week, but you have that option when you're getting that much more money coming in. So that's the first big thing. But then it gets USC and UCLA in that Eastern time slot even more often. And it gets those eyeballs. It gets the conversation. The Pac-12 just gets left out of the conversation a lot of times. And you've seen this multiple times in the last decade with the Heisman Trophy in particular. There's no reason why Toby Gerhart shouldn't have won the Heisman Trophy the year he did, or Christian McCaffrey shouldn't have been. Those guys should have been at least second. And I don't believe either one of them was the years that they were in it. And part of it was your games come on at 10 p.m. And, hey, if Stanford is playing Washington State, does the East Coast media person who's worked that day and maybe they had a noon game, they get to the stadium at 10 a.m. Eastern time? Are they staying up till 2 a.m. to watch that?
They're not watching that.
When they've been working all day, you put in 12, 14 hours because that's how long, normal Saturday is for a reporter. Are you then going to, I'd wind down and I watch other games, but if I've been at a stadium, since early in the morning, then I'm probably not going to be staying up super late, especially because that the next day's work has to come as well. So I think that's one of the things that it will enhance, just the extra attention there, because in the Big Ten is going to be talked about more just on a national scale than the Pac-12 has been recently. So I think that plays into it. And the Big Ten Network. And I know there's some complaints. I'm hearing a lot more of them. I just moved to the East Coast during the off season. So I just say that I set these wheels in motion myself, just getting myself prepared as I'm still covering USC from the East Coast and flying back and forth and everything. So they're just making it easier on me. But no, the Big Ten Network, and I know there's been some complaints about the Big Ten Network since I've been here. I'm hearing some of those, but it is nowhere near as bad as the Pac-12 network. And the fact that the Big Ten Network can display, USC and UCLA, I think in a better light, then I think that, that's an advantage as well for them. So, I think those are a couple of the clear advantages that will help rise the ship of USC and UCLA. And, just the fact that there is more fan interest in the Big Ten than there is in the Pac-12. And hey, the Pac-12, they are very, the Arizona basketball fans are super, super into everything. The Utah football fans are but I think as you get across to Texas and further east, you get just that buy-in as a whole into the athletic department rather than one team. I think it's just more common where people are into it. And hey, if you play well, then they'll come. And every coach will tell you that. But I think that you'll just get a little bit more interest from the Big Ten. And I think that Kevin Warren mentioned it during the Big Ten media days, is that there are a ton of alumni in the Los Angeles area from Big Ten schools. So I think you got a built-in base a little bit there as well. And maybe that attracts some more people to leave the Midwest and come to Los Angeles, or vice versa, knowing that they can see their team, because I know there are some diehards that don't want to move away from where their team is playing.
Let me ask you this, because I think you hit on something really interesting and insightful, because I agree. I think the Pac-12 has been out of the media limelight a little bit, but didn't they lean into that also a little bit with celebrating the Pac-12 after dark and, kind of embracing – it's a tough spot, right? Just because there's nothing you can do about time zones, but it felt like they weren't very maybe proactive throughout this entire college football restructuring. I mean, they had opportunities to expand, correct? And they kind of didn't.
The Pac-12, and was potentially going to have the first super conference, because there was, the talk, I believe it was around 2012, probably the decade 2010 to 2012, somewhere in there, of potentially adding Oklahoma and Texas, which obviously now have gone to the SEC. But Oklahoma, Texas, I think it was Oklahoma State, and I can't remember who the pairing was for Texas to come along, but to become the Pac-16, and that would have changed the landscape of college athletics then. So they had an opportunity there. The problem has been for the Pac-12 is that Larry Scott was their commissioner, and Larry Scott was a god-awful commissioner. And now George Kliavkoff has come in, and I feel sorry for him. This happens to him basically on his year anniversary. He has said all the right things, even taking shots at the Big 12 during the Pac-12 media day on Friday. So I've talked with him at a couple of events, and he's says all the right things and is doing all the right things from what you can see from the outside. And unfortunately, there's just nothing you can do about this. The cards he's being dealt just aren't fair to him. But Larry Scott came with the first big TV deal, and it looked like it was going to be a big thing for the Pac-12. But they created the Pac-12 network, and they created 6 different regional networks off of it. And it just, you never got viewership there. They never got a deal done with DirecTV. Larry Scott, at every step along the way, messed things up after getting the TV deal. And it was a really long TV deal, and maybe they didn't know at the time that was probably not the best move to make, making a 12-year deal, because then the dollar value, depreciated sooner, because other conferences started getting their deals that were bigger dollars and whatnot. But every other step along the way, there were things that could have been done, and Larry Scott didn't do them. From the smallest things of starting out the football media days with like 8 minutes of talk with no mention of the football programs, like talking about all the championships they won in all these other sports and everything else. I don't know if you know this or not, but football is the one that makes all the money. And you're just going to talk about, hey, the water polo was great. There's like 18 teams that play in the entire country. Let's move on to the football portion of the conversation. And that was Larry Scott for you. So I think that was one of the big things that hurt them. I think leaning into Pac-12 after dark was a good move for them. And I think it was actually a positive, because it became something that people, if you are on the East Coast, and, when I was in college, you're watching every game all night long, because you're up with your buddies on Saturday night. You're drinking. Everyone's having a great time. The TV is always on.
Yep.
When I was in college was when Reggie Bush, I remember the Fresno State game, out at a bar, walking by and said, no, I got to stop and watch this. We got to watch this. I don't know what's going on, but this is good. This is getting crazy. Seeing some of the stats and stuff pop up. But you lean into that and you say, okay, Pac-12 after dark, you guys got to tune in, because you never know what's going to happen here. It's crazy. And I think that's great. That's similar to the Maction, on Tuesdays and Thursdays. I would always watch that growing up as well. So, you lean in where the time slots are available, and having that time slot gives you, that's why the Pac-12, I think, is a little bit better situation right now than the Big 12, because they have that extra time slot where they have valuable content that can be provided. And now it's not ideal for the teams and the players, and the fans there, but it's great for the TV networks to have that extra content late night. So I think leaning into that was a great idea. However, forcing the way they forced some things, they didn't set themselves up. Another thing that Larry Scott and the Pac-12 did not do well is scheduling. They had an issue where teams would travel on a road game and then the next week have a Friday night game as well on the road. And they had this happen. This happened, and it cut out a team that could potentially be in the playoff or be in the top 5 like 4 or 5 years straight, because they just weren't paying attention and didn't realize how much of an issue this was of having to travel. And again, the Pac-12 travel, like you mentioned, is pretty far for some of the games. So you're traveling to, even if it's for USC, it was travel to Stanford, where you come back and you get back on late Sunday night or early Sunday morning. Or super late on Saturday night. You're not doing anything Saturday. It takes a day to recover, basically. So, and then when you travel an extra day early, you're just compressing that schedule. And the teams on those Friday night away games would struggle. The top teams would lose, and it happened to USC. It's happened to Oregon, Washington, Stanford. All these teams would lose, and you go, wow, the Pac-12 just doesn't have any power teams. Well, you're not setting them up for success. If you have a USC and they're going to be good, or you have an Oregon, they're going to be good, you should be looking at that 2 years in advance and saying, all right, what can we do to make this, not that it's unequal, but just not make it more difficult on them. And the Pac-12 was constantly making it more difficult on their top teams in the name of parity. And Larry Scott once said, one of our reporters asked, would you rather have a powerhouse that dominates, or would you rather have parity? And he said parity. And obviously, you can see from the SEC football model and, for ACC with Clemson, it is much better for your conference as a whole and for the money involved to have a powerhouse or two that are battling out every year, rather than having every team being 8-4.
Well, you can see it in the Big Ten with Ohio State as well. Like, it's just it's better. And, in that aspect, I think USC fans are going to enjoy the Big Ten. Even if Kevin Warren isn't Delaney was a visionary in terms of conferences, setting up the Big Ten network, that kind of stuff. It's a pretty well-run conference in that regard. Coming up, I want to get your take on what's left of the Pac-12. What's the future of the Pac-12? Who else should the Big Ten potentially target here? I'm really enjoying this conversation. Really appreciate it. But first, we're going to jump to LinkedIn. LinkedIn is your number one source for a professional network. And, as we're gearing up for fall, you need to find the right people on your team to help your small business fire on all cylinders. It's something I've used professionally. It's helped me in my career personally. And LinkedIn, it's the largest professional network in the world. It has a reach of over 800 million people. So you're able to add your job for free through our special LinkedIn promo. Add your job for free, and LinkedIn will take care of the rest. They'll connect the right people to your job with advanced tools to filter out people that have no business applying for your job and your opportunity. And it would just waste everybody's time. So it's win-win. Get the right people, match them up with the right opportunities. Like I said, there's simple tools, screening questions, job placement stuff that makes LinkedIn the number one rated by small businesses professional network in the world. It's why small businesses, again, continue to choose LinkedIn networks. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the candidates you want to talk to faster. Every week, 40 million job seekers visit LinkedIn. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Post your job for free. Terms and conditions do apply. I want to thank everyone again for making Locked On Badgers your first listen. We're going to bring Shotgun Spratling back on and continue talking about USC comes to the Big Ten. I definitely want to give you an opportunity, though. Where can people find your work, especially with you guys coming into the Big Ten? How can they follow what's going on with USC? What's going on with you?
Yeah, so you can find all my USC coverage at Shotgun SPR on Twitter. You can find my photos. I'm usually on the sideline shooting photos during games, so you can find that at Instagram at Shotgun Spratling. You can also follow our main accounts. The Peristyle is what our message board is called. What USCFootball.com has had the Peristyle podcast for over 20 years now. My boss is an innovator in the realm. So, I think, I don't even know what number episode we're on. We're up over 1,000 for sure. And, we have multiple each week. We have a live show on Sundays. And during the season, we have live shows on Thursdays previewing the weekend's games. So if you guys want to come in and see what's going on with USC, you can check us out there on YouTube, as well as Facebook and Twitter. And throw your questions in there as well if you want to hear about how good Tackett Curtis is or whatnot.
No, you can't do this. You can't do it. No Badger fans are listening after that. They all left. But I think it will be a lot of fun to jump into that. We're going to link all that in the show notes as well. It'll be fun for Badger fans to jump into that, especially when this thing really kicks off. We're talking a couple years, but going on a road trip to USC for a conference game is going to be wild. And we're definitely going to want to interact and figure out, what the bar scene, the tailgate scene is, all that, and vice versa when y'all come to Madison. So yeah, it's going to be fun and different.
I am looking forward to Camp Randall. The Wisconsin's one of the few Big Ten schools that I haven't been to yet. Again, and because it's not necessarily relevant for Wisconsin fans, but if you're into college baseball, I cover the entire West Coast and then now the Northeast, kind of doing a coast-to-coast thing. So covering the Big Ten as well. Rutgers and Maryland obviously were really good this year. So I've been to a bunch of the different, at least to the campuses, not necessarily all the football programs and the football stadiums, but haven't been out to Wisconsin. So looking forward to that one for sure when that trip comes up on USC schedule.
Yeah, it'll be fun. I want to talk about what's left of the Pac-12. In your opinion, I think you and I, we talked a little bit before the show, and I think you and I agree that there's some really interesting options still out there in the college football landscape. Where should the Big Ten look if they're looking to add more Pac-12 schools? Let's say they want 4 more.
Well, obviously the big question is what's going to happen with Notre Dame. Everyone's kind of waiting on that domino to fall, and then where will it go from there? With the shots being taken but from the Big 12 and the Pac-12 back and forth at each other, I think that actually plays to the Big Ten's favor, because if you do want to take Stanford and then potentially Washington, Oregon, whoever you're looking at out there, then it makes it that much easier if the two conferences that could merge are fighting with each other. Because you're not going to get that grant of rights signed and everything. In Oregon, I think it was their athletic director or president, I can't remember who was at the Pac-12 media days, and basically he was asked about it. Would you sign another grant of rights? And he said, the contracts are pretty short these days. TV contracts are pretty short, and he just kind of deferred the question. And basically, I think Oregon is hoping that the Big Ten comes calling. And now I don't know if USC and UCLA want Oregon there or want, Oregon's kind of the one where at least USC, people around USC aren't too keen on them joining.
I've heard this. Dive into that for a sec. Why is that?
There's been some, just not seeing eye to eye, basically. And part of it is, part of the reason why USC and UCLA work so well in the Big Ten, I think, is because of all the stuff off the athletic field. Is the research institutes, the academic, and Oregon just isn't quite that quality, that tier that Stanford is or Washington or USC is on the West Coast. So I don't know if it's a little bit of arrogance or snobbishness to be like, do you want to bring them in as well? But obviously, they're also not in. When you're looking at the potential schools to join the Big Ten, what do they add? Obviously, Oregon adds Nike, and Phil Knight being the big benefactor for multiple schools on the West Coast. But obviously, Beaverton being right there near the campus in Eugene and Nike's campus and all being there. But Eugene's an hour and a half, 2 hours away from Portland. Portland's not the largest city.
Right.
If you're looking at the markets, you would look at Salt Lake City or in Utah, or you would look at Colorado. Boulder's 30 minutes outside of Denver. You're looking at Arizona State and Phoenix area. Those markets are better markets. Obviously, Stanford and Cal are in the Bay Area. That's a huge market as well. The questions become to me: who does Stanford get paired up with if they are actually to move? Do they get paired up with Notre Dame? And hey, it's just one team coming from the Pac-12 at that time, and then maybe it's Washington and Oregon. Are those two paired up? I think the pairings will be interesting because you want to keep it obviously at an even number as you come into a conference. Or at the Big Ten, as they're adding teams, they want to keep it even. So, are you trying to bring in 4 more teams from the West? Are you trying to bring in Notre Dame and 3 teams from the West? Are you trying to bring in Notre Dame and 1 other team? I think eventually, and like I said earlier, the travel is going to be really difficult on some other sports outside of football. When you're playing a 3-game weekend in baseball or you're playing softball, if you're UCLA softball, because USC does not have a softball team, every single conference road series you play is at least 1,500 miles away. So I think that, my thought is maybe not in 2024 when USC and UCLA join, but eventually 26, 28 maybe, there will be a Western division of the Big Ten. And I think that there, ideally you would have 6 teams there. So now you're traveling to those 5 much more frequently than you're traveling to Rutgers or Maryland all the way across the country, just to, make that travel a little bit easier. And, you're going to, if you're going to Washington, it's not as far as, making the trip to Nebraska still. So you're not going as far as those trips, because I travel around a pretty good amount, covering and now being on the East Coast, traveling back to the West Coast pretty frequently. 2-hour trips are much different than 6-hour trips. Yes, you're on a plane and hey, you're just adding, you're still, cooped up, whatever. It is a lot different on the body in particular when you get off the plane and just kind of having that feel of the jet lag. And if you've ever flown on an international flight and you're going 12 or 16 or 18 hours, that's a lot different than, a 6-hour flight across the country too. It just has a different toll on you. So if you're UCLA softball and you play a weekend series, or USC baseball and you play at, Penn State, and then you have a Tuesday midweek game or Wednesday midweek game.
That's
so
brutal.
the West Coast does Tuesday midweek games. I wonder if that will have to change for USC and UCLA. The East Coast, pretty much everyone does Wednesday midweek games. So, you traveling back and you have a full travel day on Monday, and then you're suddenly, you're playing on Tuesday. Like, that's going to be really tough on athletes. You're going to see some upsets happen because of that. In other sports, in football, you're going to feel the effects of it too. But it's not going to be as bad because it's only once a week. Whereas some other sports, you may end up, you travel to the East Coast for a weekend, and then you travel somewhere else on the West Coast for your midweek game or something like that. That's going to be really tough on them. So I think eventually you would like to have 6 teams on the West, and maybe that's Stanford and Cal, and then Washington and Oregon. I think that would be the ideal for the Big Ten. Even though Cal adds nothing athletically, their athletic program is just is awful. But they do have, like I said, the similar outside of the athletics. They fit the mold.
They definitely fit the mold.
They fit a lot better than Utah or Arizona State. Arizona State obviously is not known for their academics at all. But if you're looking at market, you look at Utah or Colorado, because those are the big markets there, or Arizona State, much more than you look at Oregon there. So I think it's very interesting to see what the Big Ten, how they kind of go about it, because right now, especially with the Big 12 and the Pac-12, throwing barbs at each other, they got their pick of the litter.
They really do.
They can say, hey, do you want to make $30 million a year? You want to make $100 million a year? And that's
it's $100 million. Oh, sorry. I was just going to say it's $100 million a year plus stability, right? Like, there's no worries. It's the money and the stability.
And I think that, that's going to sell pretty much everyone. The one exception, the one question mark I would have is, would Stanford still make that move? Because everyone kind of pictures like, oh, okay, if they get Notre Dame, Stanford would be a good pairing. Academically, that they play every year in football. USC can keep that rivalry going with them, keeping them in the same conference. All those things. But if you listen to the comments, Bernard Meir is the athletic director there. He was at Pac-12 Media Day, as well as David Shaw. Their comments did not sound like a team that is looking, with their eyes looking outward. Whereas Oregon's, the comments from their AD or president, whichever was there, definitely did sound more like that, or at least that they were staying away from, pushing for the Pac-12 to stay together, which is what it sounded a lot more like for Stanford. And, Stanford has a huge endowment, so maybe the money doesn't mean anything to them. And they have a lot more sports, so maybe that's something they're looking into, to travel for that. But, I think they would be the one team where everyone else, if invited, is like, yeah, we want to be in. We want to, give us that invite. Whereas Stanford's like, we'll see. If you want to invite us, we'll mull it over.
Well, here's a couple of interesting ones, right? And I've already kept you for 30 minutes. I always run out with the good guests and the smart ones. I always run out of time before questions. But here's a couple of interesting ones with Stanford, right? Culturally, they're just wired differently than an Oregon, right? Sports aren't the be all end all there, to your point. But here's another interesting, just kind of side thought. If you go to the Big Ten, suddenly you're competing with USC, Ohio State, Penn State, Wisconsin, Iowa. I mean, that's a Michigan State. Like, that's a tough racket. There could be a path you stay in the Pac-12 and maybe the Pac-12 gobbles up some Big 12 or vice versa, and you can still play in a quasi Power 5 conference, have an easier road to a 10-2 season if the playoffs expand. But, you could make an argument that that's the sneaky play. Like, you don't jump to the big conference if you have the endowment.
True. And the thing with Stanford is that all the changes that are happening in college athletics outside of this realignment, you're talking about NIL, the transfer portal, all these things are not really inducive at Stanford, or conducive, to them being successful. One, they don't get graduate transfers. All their players transfer. You don't see, rarely have fifth-year guys. They don't even list guys as, if he takes a red shirt, they don't list him as still as a redshirt freshman or anything. They just say he's a sophomore because almost everyone is leaving after 4 years. Now, some of their guys do get in the grad programs there, but it is extremely difficult. So more often than not, they're losing grad transfers rather than gaining anyone. Their basketball program has basically has taken like one transfer in like, I don't know, something like 5 or 6, 7, 8 years, whereas everyone else is taking multiple every year. The baseball program, which I know really well, they basically, they lost a really valuable reliever to Texas A&M, helped them get to the College World Series this year. They lose grad transfers. They've had one grad transfer in the 5 years that the current coaching staff is there.
That's remarkable.
And he was a guy that I think came from an Ivy League school. So, that kind of tells you, where the level of student has to be able to get into grad school at Stanford. So those things aren't going their way. There's not a huge, they have a ton of money there at the school, but it's not invested in athletics where people want to do the pay for play style of NIL that is kind of rampant right now to stay at the same level as some other programs. So if that's the case, maybe Stanford says, we just don't need to get into all that. We'll stay over here. We'll take care of business here and go with whatever the Pac-12 goes with, rather than having, that level of competition, like you mentioned, in the Big Ten.
No, that's really good. That's a really interesting perspective, and it's going to be fascinating over the next 2 or 3 years. I think Notre Dame's obviously the big piece, like we both said. I really appreciate it, man. I hope we can do it again. And like I said, I kept you. I told you I'd keep you for 20 minutes. I've kept you for 32 or 30. So, no, I really appreciate it. We're gonna link all your show notes, every place that people can find you in the show description. So definitely, if you want to get smarter, Badger fans, Big Ten fans, go check out Peristyle Podcast. If you Google USC Podcast, it comes up as like the first 7 hits. I mean, you guys are everywhere. The content you guys put out is remarkable. So, really, really appreciate you jumping on, man. And I hope we can do it again.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's Shotgun Sprayling, guys. Coming up, we're going to do a quick recap on the show. First, I want to talk to you about Built Bar. Built Bar remains my number one source for all my nutritional needs. It is just the healthiest, best sidekick I found to help me eat a little better, stay fit. The flavors are amazing, absolutely incredible. And it's something that my kids have started to just take care of my little hidden Built Bar stashes because they taste like candy bars, but I'm kind of low-key tricking them into eating healthy because they're full of protein and they're not full of all the crap that's in candy bars, not full of sugar. And there's a reason Built Bar is taking over Locked On. We all eat it. All the hosts eat it. It's incredible. I can't say enough good things about it. It's literally one of my favorite products I've found in 2022 to help me on my health journey. Everything's 100% real chocolate. Again, 17 to 20 grams of protein, low sugar. And if you go to their website, they constantly are changing flavors and varieties so you can get new stuff. I love the churro. I love the marshmallow puff one. It's incredible. And we have a great offer for you too. Go to built.com, use promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED15. Get 15% off your order. That's promo code LOCKED15, LOCKED15, 15% off your order at built.com. Thank you again, everybody, for making Locked On Badgers one of your first listens. I just want to do kind of a very quick recap. I know I've already kept you a little bit, but it's really interesting, right? And I wanted to talk a little bit more, but the show is running a little late. But I wanted to also get his perspective on the schools that are being left behind, what he's going to forget, or what he's going to really miss about USC in the Pac-12. I always think about Wisconsin if it were to leave the Big Ten and everything I would miss. I would miss the trips to Kinnick. I would even miss the trips to Ryan. I wouldn't miss the trips to Northwestern. Never mind. But playing Iowa in the fall, I would really miss that. The Axe game, if Minnesota didn't come with, bludgeoning in the Gophers, 18 straight years or whatever it was. I would really miss that. I would miss Michigan and Penn State and Ohio State. So it's just very interesting to me, the programs and the fan bases and traditions that are just being left behind and jettisoned like flotsam, just kind of floating away. And, I wanted to kind of get his take on that as well. We just ran out of time a little bit, but I hope everyone, enjoyed the show. I'm really excited to keep kind of talking conference realignment, what's going to happen next. We have some interesting stuff coming up on Locked On Badgers this week. So continue tuning in. Really appreciate it. And we'll talk to you guys soon.